At issue this week, under pressure over climate change.
Will the Prime Minister once again cave and allow another carve-out on the carbon tax for farmers? Yes or no?
The Conservatives and the NDP keep pushing the Prime Minister to give more Canadians a carbon tax break.
Seeing the NDP vote with the Conservatives against a price on pollution is something that has disappointed millions of progressives across this country.
This as the government is called out for not doing enough to reduce emissions.
The Prime Minister has literally missed every single target he set on emissions.
Is the fight against climate change taking a back seat to affordability? Hi there, I'm Rosemary Barton, here to break it all down tonight. Chantal Hebert, Coyne and Althia Raj. Good to see everybody. I'll start with you, Althia. We saw two motions this week calling for changes. One to get rid of the carbon tax on home heating, and the other around the GST. So obviously opposition parties trying to keep the pressure on there. What did that tell you about whether this is ever going to go away for the Liberals, and whether their argument that they are dealing with climate change broadly is working?
I don't think it's going to go away because in order for them to actually make their target, they have to announce things that are, I would say, even more controversial, like capping the oil sands, for example, or introducing legislation that would basically bind the hands of a future government through contracts for difference, basically saying to large emitters, you've made investments because we told you the carbon price was going to increase. And, you know, if Pierre Poilievre's elected, well, he'll have to give you billions of dollars, at least millions of dollars, to make up for the fact that that system no longer exists. Right. So I don't think it's going to go away. But I think it's a reflection of the fact that the Liberal government has never really properly explained to Canadians how carbon pricing works. It has not told people for whom there is a federal backstop, so Ontario residents, for example, that you get a big check every few months. If this was a Conservative government, you can bet a lot of money that there would be a cabinet minister with a giant cardboard check making an announcement every few months, reminding you about all this money you're getting back in your pocket. They never invested, and right now, really, the clash is between two different visions. You have Conservatives who really do not believe that Canadians should be making sacrifices because it's just a drop in the bucket when it comes to global emissions. And you have Liberals who believe there is a moral responsibility and an economic opportunity, but they have never properly prosecuted that case. And I think that's why we are where we are.
Yeah, and it's interesting, Chantal, to see the NDP side with the Conservatives this week, because they, I think, are banking on the idea that the issue of cost of living is more in people's mind than climate change. Even though, as Althia points out, the carbon tax gives you a rebate, it's a very small contributor to the rate of inflation and all those things. So that to me is fascinating to see that they're willing to take that gamble too.
And I'm guessing they're reacting to Pierre Poilievre maybe making inroads in some of their seats, some of them in rural communities. But the problem is, I think it's kind of summed up in what Althia said. If you're going to tell Canadians it's moral responsibility and sacrifices, you're not going to win the day. It has to become a communications about you need to do this because that is how you will do better in the future. It's not. It reminds me of I'm going to say something really weird here. The debate over official bilingualism. You should be officially bilingual, learn French and English because that's what the country is about. No, you should learn French because it's going to bring you money at the end of the day. And the same is true of climate change. You need to transition because you don't have a choice. It's not your moral duty. It's not a sacrifice. It's reality, and it's going to hit you in the face.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that to both of your point, I don't know, Andrew, that I hear that argument being articulated in that way, in that clear way by Liberals. And I don't know how damaging that is as they go on and the Conservatives position themselves the way that they are.
Well, it's a hard case to make. You're talking about something that's happening over several decades.
Yeah, that's right.
Where the action involved requires 192 countries to all participate, and people can look around and see which countries are and which countries aren't. So it's a tough sell. But it is remarkable that we should be talking about hollowing out the carbon tax, or in Pierre Poilievre's case, scrapping it altogether, just in the same week when the Environment Commissioner has brought in this quite scathing report saying that we're nowhere near to hitting our targets. Not even the 40 to 45% that the government brought in 21, but even if you read the report carefully, even the 30 to 34% that the government claims they're on target for now, the projections are basically fantasy. They're based upon wildly optimistic assumptions. There's no timetables, there's no targets for each of the measures. It's all just basically people on a wish and a hope. So if we're nowhere near to meeting our targets and we're starting to take away one of the prime instruments for trying to reach those targets, well then one of two things is going to happen. Either we're just going to give up altogether and renege on our international commitments, which I guess some people would like to see us do, or we're going to make a desperate attempt to try and save face and avoid political embarrassment and pile on ever more expensive, costlier measures to try to reach these targets, things that cost 5, 6, 7, 8 times as much as the carbon tax. And I think neither of those are particularly appetizing ideas. Look, we have a real problem with growth in this country as it is. We're projecting growth to be at what, 1.6, 1.7%, leaving aside the carbon tax, when we've got an aging population, skyrocketing healthcare costs and all that. We can ill afford to be giving up more growth than we absolutely have to. The cost of a carbon tax we can maybe bear with that kind of really low growth. But if you're talking about these much more expensive subsidy and regulatory schemes, the studies I've seen indicate that you're basically talking about cutting the growth rate in half. We can't afford to do that.
Well, I'll say two things. Stephen Guilbeault says that they still can make those targets. That's provided they put all those things some of the things that Althia laid out there in place and quickly. And the second thing is when Pierre Poilievre was asked whether he could meet the targets, he didn't say anything. He didn't even say that he would commit to doing that. Althia.
Yeah.
He didn't say that he would even commit to leaving the price on carbon for large emitters, which I thought that was interesting. But I think Andrew raises an interesting point, and it's a point that doesn't just apply to carbon pricing and the government's climate change initiatives. The government has a real problem with follow through. They make announcements and they do not deliver. It takes them years to get the regulations through, and they are running out of time. So if they do want to make a significant dent, if Justin Trudeau wants this to be part of his legacy, if he wants to bind the hands of a future government, possibly even another one of his governments, he needs to move faster than they have moved, and they are running out of time.
Chantal.
So this is the way that I believe from the outside that the government's thinking is at. And it is at, yes, we're backing off, we're sending weird signals on our climate change policy, but better us being re-elected than them who will do nothing. I can understand the rationale, but it does not make for strong policy. It is, again, like Brian Mulroney saying, let's not do free trade until we're re-elected, and then until we're re-elected and re-elected again. But basically, the message over the past 2 weeks has been that no party, the NDP, the Liberals, or the Conservatives, are serious about climate change.
Can I just add one thing?
Go ahead, Althia. Yeah.
It represents, and we haven't really talked about this, but a real division within the cabinet table. And how the government responds in the next few months will tell us which side has won. Andrew.
And if nobody's serious about it, then maybe it's time we admitted that. If the cost of hitting these targets is because we're not willing to do it by carbon pricing, if the cost is we have to do it with absurdly expensive mechanisms, then I'd rather we didn't hit our targets. The world will not end if we don't hit our targets. But if we lock ourselves into permanently much more expensive measures that are going to really reduce our growth rate, I don't think that's a cost worth paying.
So some people might say the world will. Some people might say the world will end, not by 2030, but that's the whole point of why you have to act now.
Not depending on what Canada does.
Okay,
you know, that's where the critics are right. We are one part. We should do our part.
Yeah.
But the world is not going to end, it's not going to depend on whether we hit our targets or not. We should try to do so, but we should try to do so at acceptable cost.
And Chantal, do you think that Canadians still, from what you've seen, care about climate change, given everything that they're dealing with financially and economically? And is that what this conversation has shifted to?
Yes and no. I do believe that Canadians are still concerned about climate change, and even if they were not, it's staring them in the face with every 2 months with things that are climate change induced.
Yeah.
Andrew is right. about the fact that if we just stand down and ignore it, it's not going to make a huge difference. But at some point, economics will dictate that we pay attention. And that's the main room for optimism for climate change activists, is that it's going to exact a toll on your capacity to have a strong economy if you become one of those climate change, not deniers, but ignorers.
Yeah, okay. We're going to leave it there. When we return, we'll take a look at a new bill to ban replacement workers.
This is about giving power to workers, taking away power from greedy CEOs and making sure workers can fight to get a fair share of the profits.
Will this help labor negotiations, and who deserves the credit? That's next. In a year of labor unrest, new legislation to ban replacement workers during strikes and lockouts. The Liberals say it was a platform promise. The NDP says it only happened because of them.
The Liberals would never have done this. They would have never tabled this legislation but for the fact that New Democrats and Labor together fought to make this happen.
So how could this new legislation affect labor disputes in this country? Who does get the credit? Let's bring back Chantal, Andrew, and Althia. Andrew, why don't you start us off on this one? We've seen a lot of labor disputes this year, certainly. How significant do you think this piece of legislation is, or is this just about keeping the NDP happy?
Yeah, I mean, as the Liberals go down in the polls, the price of NDP cooperation goes up. They had, it is true, put in their platform that they would bring in this measure with regard to lockouts in a bid to try and appeal to NDP voters, but now they've included strikes as well. So a union can go on strike, and basically management has to negotiate with one arm tied behind its back. I don't see the injustice that's being righted here. I don't see an imbalance being made more balanced. I see this unbalancing the system. I think business is going to have lots of things to say about this in the weeks to come. But it doesn't seem to me to be, it seems to me to be a solution, in search of a problem. And I think it's much more about politics than anything else.
Chantal?
Well, Quebec has had anti-scab legislation, as it's called, for decades. And labor negotiations still take place in much the normal way outside Quebec. The NDP had been calling for this for decades. So have the Bloc. They sure brought in, we were reminded today, 11 pieces of legislation to bring this out. So clearly this is a result of the Liberals, notwithstanding their platform, doing what they need to do to satisfy the NDP, and at a time when their pact with the NDP is fragile, to time it with something that looks like a win. And it is a win, I guess, from big labor perspective. It is considered a win. I can't remember, and I'm sure you're like me, a time when the NDP or the Bloc were not calling for it.
I can't believe how effusive NDP MPs were on Parliament Hill today, according to my colleagues who were up there. They were overjoyed that they had this win, Althia.
Yeah, it was described to me as a generational project for the NDP. And you kind of heard that from Alexandre Boulris, who was a union activist before he entered politics. He's the lone NDP MP from Quebec. But aside from the fact that the NDP and the Bloc and the Liberals are all claiming credit, what this bill is also possibly a wedge issue with the Conservatives, which makes the NDP incredibly happy, because the Conservatives have been making inroads with unionized workers, support with unionized workers, whether they're private or public, which from public or private unions. And this is a reminder to all these people that if Mr. Poilievre decides not to support this piece of legislation, this is a continuation of his positions when he was in the Harper government against Bill 525, which and 377, bills that made it harder for unions to mobilize, bills that drowned them in red tape, and that even at the time he spoke in favor of right-to-work legislation that would have been a huge, huge blow to the union movement. So it is, there is a reason why New Democrats are celebrating today, and there's also, I believe, a reason why we did not hear from the Conservatives today.
Yeah, you have a much better memory than I do, because I wouldn't have remembered the numbers of those bills, although I remember it happening. Andrew, it's a wedge issue, and that's an awfully good point for sure. But But if everyone's trying to claim it as a wedge issue, I'm not sure who gets to benefit from it, or if everybody does. I don't know.
Yeah, and I'm not entirely sure the Conservatives are all that unhappy to see polarized on this, because they will be owning the share that is opposed to this. And as you say, the people who are in favor will be divided between the Liberals and the NDP. I'll just note, by the way, that they thoughtfully exempted themselves from this provision. So while they're imposing this requirement on private sector employers, it will not apply in the federal public service.
Well, that's because if there's an emergency, you need them to do things. Isn't that the reason? I think so.
No, there's exemptions for anyway for threats to health, et cetera.
Right, okay.
This is just a blanket exemption for the federal public service.
Chantal.
Andrew is right on this, but the notion that the Conservatives under Stephen Harper were anti-labor certainly hurt the Conservatives. And I do believe it doesn't really matter who wins today. What matters is who stands to lose.
Yeah.
And the Bloc, the NDP, and the Liberals have a common goal here to make sure that whoever loses is Pierre Poilievre.
Okay, so let me, I guess, end on this then. Althia, is this bill enough to keep the NDP happy for a while?
It's enough to keep them happy for now. I mean, who knows what's going to happen when the House returns in the winter. So I don't know. And this is the thing with the NDP. They keep moving the yardsticks, as they should, because they're in the driver's seat.
They can keep moving the yardsticks, but again this week I heard Jagmeet Singh go out and attack the Liberals and the Conservatives, he now calls them the corporate coalition. And I just wonder at what point moving the yardsticks becomes an issue for the NDP and for the Liberals. At what point this pact no longer works, Chantal?
Yes, but the day that the NDP says it's done with supporting the Liberals does not mean Parliament ends. It means the Bloc gains the balance of power. It's not as if the NDP owns it, except by virtue of that pact. So, and I've seen no indication that Yves-François Blanchet, the Bloc leader, is in a hurry to go in an election.
Yeah, or that anybody.
It's kind of a lose-lose for the NDP. They walk away from the pact, they become the fourth party again.
Okay, I'll leave it there.
But
go ahead, Andrew.
While they're in the pact, they might as well wring everything they can out of the Liberals. I actually think they're in a good position that the Liberals are so desperate that they're going to be willing to give them just about anything.
We have to take a short break, but when we return, we'll look at the upcoming fall economic statement right after this. Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland is set to table Ottawa's fall economic statement on November 21st. The statement will be the first chance to see how the government is dealing with economic pressures and helping Canadians. So, how important is this economic update for the Liberals? Let's bring everybody back. Chantal, Andrew, and Althia. Chantal, we'll start with you. This date was announced on the same day that the supplementary estimates were also tabled by Anita Anand, which started to show where the government's starting to carve off some money in different departments, at least the beginning of it. How important is that fiscal responsibility piece going to be to this economic update?
Well, first a word on carving out money from actual spending. $500 million. I'm going to be revising my budget to save $2 this month. It's basically what happened today. It's really exciting. But on multi-billion-dollar balance sheets, I'm not sure it makes much of a dent. That being said, yes, the timing of it is the latest effort after the break for the Liberals to try to regain some initiative in the House of Commons, which has not been happening since the House came back on September 18th. It's been downhill all the way since then. But the problem is that the finance minister will have to talk about the deficit that is significantly higher than what she forecast back in the spring in her budget. And I'm curious to see whether there will be any numbers attached to that pharmacare promise that the NDP wants fulfilled by the end of the year.
Yeah, and then how they balance all the other things that they're trying to do around affordability and housing. I don't know, if you shave off $2 often, that could add up to a lot of money, Andrew.
You never know.
Well, the amount announced today was $500 million. Federal spending this year, I believe, is forecast at $459 billion. So it's not
Drop
a
in the bucket.
serious
Got it.
proposal. I don't have high hopes, I have to say, for this statement because they're so far down the polls, and you do get the sense that a lot of centrist voters have basically tuned them out. So what you may see in the next months is the Liberals really going after NDP voters, trying to save the furniture. Yeah. In which case, goodbye fiscal responsibility, what lingering traces there was of this. If there were two things I would love to see in this budget, one would be some kind of fiscal anchor. You remember at one point it was going to be, we're going to balance the budget eventually, if not now. Though they gave up on that. There's no ever forecast for a balanced budget. But then it was going to be a steadily declining debt to GDP ratio. And now the debt to GDP ratio is going up, so that's gone. So what is the fiscal anchor, if any? And the other thing is spending forecasts that remain current for more than about 6 months. Every time they issue either a budget or a fall statement, they show this spending, going up very gradually in years to come at a very flat curve. And then every 6 months, they just revise the whole curve up by about $10 billion. So spending now for this year is, 60, 70, $80 billion more than it was projected just 2 years ago. That's basically out of control. So I don't have much high hopes, but that would be my very low bar for some measure of indication that the purse strings are under some kind of control.
I'm not sure you have any hope at all, given what you just said there. But we can frame it that way if you want, Althea.
I believe one of the words Andrew was looking for was guardrails. After anchors,
oh, yes, the guardrails.
It was guardrails.
That's right.
Yes.
That's right. Yeah.
So I'm more optimistic. This is the first time since the Liberals have come back from really declining poll numbers that there is a chance for the government to lay out its agenda and say what it is focused on. So I don't know if they're going to take that opportunity or not, but I could give us an indication of where the priority areas are, if they have shifted, if the Prime Minister wants to, re-communicate a message through the Finance Minister, obviously, because she will be the one presenting it. It also means that we probably will have the Pharmacare bill before, I assume, we have the fall economic statement. I could be wrong there, but they say that they've been working on it and they seem to have come up with an agreement. So at least we'll get a general indication probably of where, if there's any money tied to it. So I think it's an opportunity. I just wonder if the government's going to take it.
Quick last word to you, Chantal.
I don't think we can see a bill if the House is going to be not sitting until this fiscal update happens.
Oh, yes, yeah,
You're supposed to show it to Parliament before you show it to us. That's one. Two, I believe their only concern is how the hell they get out of the basement in voting intentions, and that's their priorities. And my last point is, I don't think I've ever seen a budget that made Andrew happy.
Fair. But it's something to work towards, everyone. Okay, that's that issue for this week.
Aspirational.
That's right. Don't forget, you can catch The National on YouTube and CBC Gem. You can catch me on Rosemary Barton Live Sundays at 10 Eastern. Thanks for watching.